Good morning. All right, I hope you are all well rested for another exciting, inspiring day at the GIA annual conference. Thank you for making it in this morning, and we're ready to have an awesome day and awesome conversation. I'm George Jacobson, Senior Program Officer for Cultural and Civic Vitality at the William Davidson Foundation, and I'm here to, thank you. I'm here to welcome you to our second and final morning of Idea Lab, where we take a moment of time and focus our energy and attention on those at the center of all that our work is about, the artist. Now, I know some conference attendees arrived after our first Idea Lab session yesterday, so before we jump in, I'd just like to say to our new guests, welcome to Detroit. I hope you enjoy the rest of your stay during the conference and that you'll be back to continue your explorations in the city. This conference really has been pretty rocking and rolling. As a member of the host committee, I know that GIA staff has made every effort to not just organize a set of conversations for us, but they've really gone the distance to immerse, I think, this whole body as much as they can and much as is possible for a group this large in Detroit. The upfront and focused engagement of over 100 individuals as part of the planning process, in my view, has certainly come through the conference so far, so kudos to the team. And while I'm on the subject of GIA, I want to call out again, as I mentioned very briefly yesterday, the conference guiding principles and practices in your conference program, which reflects GIA's commitment to racial equity and arts philanthropy, champions local voice and expertise, as well as local business support. I know that was appreciated as a member of the host committee and by the host committee and the folks that were engaged in the process. So on all counts, GIA, thank you very much. We can give them a round of applause. Now, today I brought a prop, a very small prop. As we launch into Idea Lab, I really do want to call attention to the fall 2017 reader that I think, I hope everyone has a chance to look at. There is no shortage of creative and thoughtful writers on Detroit and as it relates to art and artists. But I really think GIA hit the fall issue out of the park. Sarah Rose Sharp's article, Detroit Imagines Itself, deserves special attention. Her thorough and poignant piece captures the simultaneously existing and sometimes conflicting narratives about the city alongside this desire to make art, to make things better, to make a new city, make a new world. We heard and experienced this in spades through Jessica Care Moore's performance during the plenary lunch yesterday. Here in Detroit, this impulse to make is a critical part of our identity, and probably more now than ever, it's a part of our identity. And history plays a role. The piece rightly notes that there's been very little help or centralized infrastructure for Detroit for many decades, and this includes the arts broadly. What choice then, as a neighborhood resident or a citizen, but to roll up one's sleeves, make something happen, make people notice, and make people believe? The net result, as Sharp suggests, is, as she puts it, a preponderance of human resources and a broad-based sense of self-determination that stretches across the city's 139 square miles. As arts funders or funders in general, we spend a lot of time thinking about capacity, organizational capacity, staff capacity, institutional effectiveness, et cetera. And you heard some of this come through the Idea Lab sessions yesterday. As I think you'll see today, capacity is not deficient in Detroit when you turn your focus on the people who live here, and within that universe, the artist. Change the frame, and capacity is in abundance. The capacity to creatively problem solve and innovate is in abundance. The capacity to build and to make things is inherent and unstoppable, and the capacity to dream a better, more inclusive future has never been greater. While cognizant that all of us in the room operate under a unique set of circumstances, our missions, our programs, and our vision, how we steward the resources, how might we as funders address the challenge posed to us yesterday by our Idea Lab presenters and more concertedly think about and address community capacity and power? Additionally, what tools and resources do the artists who capture, present, and amplify the narratives of our communities require in order to inspire new ideas, address challenges, and help make new futures? Now, this is work that is definitely a part of the GIA conference agenda, and I'm sure it's going to be increasingly one going forward for this body, and it's great to be a part of the conversations. For this morning's Idea Lab, we have 3 presentations from 4 individuals who wear many hats, but I'll call out 3 very broad ones: artist, leader, and healer. I'm confident that they'll leave you thinking about your own community and your work as both a professional as well as a citizen. Each presentation will be about 8 minutes in length, no more. We have a seriously stern timekeeper in Kristen Pierce as a volunteer from Arizona, who's going to ensure that we stay on track. While you have your full bios in their program, I will tell you a little bit about the individuals that we'll hear from today in an order of their presentation. First, we'll have Erik Howard. Erik is the co-founder of Young Nation, a nonprofit that supports youth and community development through cultural and educational initiatives in Southwest Detroit. He combines his passion for the work with his love of photography. He also uses group activities such as low riding and street art as a mentoring tool to reach out into the community of Southwest Detroit. And for those of you who attended the pre-conference, you may have seen some of this work already, but it's going to be great again today. Next, we'll have a conversation between Il Weaver, otherwise known as Invincible, and Linda Campbell. Il is a Detroit-based lyricist, performance artist, and community organizer. They co-founded Emergence Media and serves as coordinator for the Detroit Narrative Agency. Il's artist collective Complex Movements created Beware of the Dandelions, an interactive multimedia installation exploring the relationship between complex sciences and social justice movements. Linda Campbell is a founding member of the Building Movement Project, a national social justice organization that focuses on building the capacity of nonprofit organizations for social change work. In Detroit, she focuses on issue-based advocacy, civic engagement, and resident leadership development. Linda has been driven by a passionate belief in the collective voice and power of community members to shape and transform their communities for good. Lastly, and our final Idea Lab speaker will be Devon Akmon, director of the Arab American National Museum. Devon became the director in 2013. Devon joined the museum as curator of community history shortly before the museum opened in 2005. And under his aegis, the museum was named an affiliate of the Smithsonian Institution and achieved accreditation from the American Alliance of Museums. So thank you all very much for spending your morning with us. We're very excited to learn from you. So please join me in welcoming the person who's going to keep us on the trend of 8-minute presentations, Erik Howard.
I'm excited to be here, but I'm more excited about, showing off that I can stay within 8 minutes because, a little bit of a disclaimer, I'm gonna rely on some things that are written. So we'll say that that's the lack of eye contact, not the bright lights. Welcome to Detroit. I know this isn't your guys' first day here. Thanks for being here and thanks for funding creative processes. You fund creative products, but the value that lasts when the grant is gone is in the process and what that keeps offering when the grant is gone. And so hopefully that's part of what we're gleaning from you guys being here for the conference too, in the visits and the feedback that we get is that, we're able to take those processes and put them to work here and keep showing you guys ways that they're making an impact. So last spring, we watched a building on the Alley project burn, and our neighbors used to live there. So I'm going to share a story about a building, but also a story about different ways that community can speak to us. And the story is really about how and why we do the work that we do through the Alley project. It's about how our most important products are our processes. And for us at Young Nation, at the Alley project, the frequency and depth of unlikely relationships that are formed from the work that we're doing, for us has been the best indicator of success because we found that that's where sustainable community building springs from. And in those relationships that are unlikely, we find surprises about what we already have between all of us to meet the needs that we've identified as a community. Of course, we also still always have gaps, but we find out we have a lot more tools and resources that we need to begin our work to take care of things. And so community development, I'll put it in quotes, it's a word that we talk about a lot. But it's really qualified by an equal commitment to human development, to organizational and institutional development, to physical development, and to economic development. When you're not talking about all of those things, it's hard to maybe call something community development because an economics as king approach puts them all in a car for a 50-style road trip where economics gets to play dad and drives around and navigates, and everyone else in the car and in the family should just be happy, to see the Grand Canyon. And we know that real community needs that driver in the back seat sometimes to rest, but also talk to the people in the back seat to find out how that trip is going. And that doesn't always happen. And I think that creative process has helped to keep that balance in check in a very special way, and in a way that's natural to creative work. And when they're in the back seat, sometimes somebody else should take the wheel too. So the morning that I'm going to tell you about it began heavy because when I turned the corner, I saw that the apartment building across the street from our building, where our plaza project is on Ellesmere and Avis, suffered significant damage from a fire the night before that continued to reignite throughout the morning. The fire tore through the third floor. It took some of the floors out of the building, but it also took a major part of the roof, which exposes it to the elements. So our project, which is right across the street from the building, has worked together with neighbors and youth and architects and artists to have input in the design and programming that'll help rebuild the corner right across the street from the building that we were just looking at. So we've been intentional about building tables that are designed to allow them all to be at that table and dynamically exchange information with each other, so that anything that one of them is telling the other isn't just token or pat. It's authentic, because not only is it rooted in their area of expertise, but also in their understanding of the people that are across the table from them. The neighbors that we worked with included neighbors from in the apartment building and from surrounding homes, among others. And as you can probably imagine, there aren't always natural connections between all of the neighbors, even in a community that's geographic, that maybe even defines itself by the same name. And I've found that I think we've done a pretty decent job in general at bridging some of those gaps through the process. In some cases, we've even seen amazing results as those relationships blossom between groups of neighbors that were otherwise satisfied to believe that they had nothing in common with other groups of neighbors. So the interaction between the various groups is one of the features of the rejuvenated corner that you're looking at. And so this is when we left schematic design and started to go into design development. So this looks a lot, it's not so much conceptual. It's starting to look, more like the building that you will have seen if you, came on the tour a few days ago, or if you drive by there now. And actually, I'm kind of excited because when I leave here, if I race back quick enough, I'll get to see Diseños installing part of the wrought iron screen that you see there. The interaction between those groups is a central feature and asset that made the visioning for the corner possible, to create a space that's a collective vision and continues to bring people together and create the unlikely relationships that we were talking about, where we find that our assets that we need to meet our needs are present. So the absence of the apartment building impacts, but it doesn't destroy the function of our space and programming and its ability to bring together these groups. Our neighbors are now no longer in that building. That's going to impact how we design the space to invite folks into that space. And so I carried the heaviness from that with me throughout the morning, and I started to think about the weight of the work that we do and how I had invested really emotionally. I'd heavily invested emotionally in the density and diversity that was natural to our corner of the neighborhood in more ways than I thought that I had. So I thought about systems and how those systems impact us in ways that are big and small. I thought about our corners, our street signs, infrastructure, and people that animate all of those things, and the messages that we receive from the neighborhood. I thought about the role that the city played in the now missing roof as they move forward with a step 1 in addressing a community issue without having any idea or capacity about steps 2 through 5, and without consulting community about what it was that they were doing. I thought about what it means to live in a city that now has an increased civic capacity to hear what's happening in the city, but without a matching increasing value to listen to what's happening in that city, and how that can make a difference in our daily lives and routine. I thought about how the impending change in the corner would impact the dynamics of this system of messages that we receive from our community. I thought about how the minutes are going by faster than I thought they were, because I just saw a number that is much lower than the number that I thought it was. I thought about how I need to start talking faster and maybe reading a little bit less and getting through these slides. So I left the neighborhood feeling burdened as I headed to a meeting downtown. And before my meeting, I decided to grab a coffee. And when I was walking, I saw a piano. And I've seen them around the city before, but this one just kind of stuck out to me. I see them and I'm like, oh, that's cute. Probably because I can't paint as well as the people that paint those pianos, and I don't know how to play the piano. And so they excite me, but they're somewhat of a mystery. But this one just really kind of like stuck out to me. And it might have been its location or its decoration. It said Detroit across the top, which of course is a busy and loaded word. It's nuanced, but the piano sat there inanimate and quiet. The building that I got my coffee from was beautifully restored, not at all quiet. It was adorned with modern furniture and signage that spoke loud and clear about the message that you're supposed to receive when you walk into that space. For example, one large sign inside the building said, in case you're not getting the messages through the design, they go ahead and spell it out for you. I also told the people that came on the visit that, you learn some things being part of a physical design project. And, we might call this a sign, but when they're putting it up, when they thought of it, they might have thought of it as a moment. And this moment signals things. So I had a moment at this sign, and it made me think to photograph it as the story was coming together. So the sign says what it says. You know what it says. And I noticed the stark difference in that moment about the differences in the messages here in this building and the incompatibility with the narrative that's spoken every day in the community that I just left. And so I got to go back to the meeting, or on my way back to the meeting from grabbing the coffee. I passed the piano again, and this time it wasn't quiet. So it was kind of being beat into a somewhat familiar tune. I don't even know what song this is, but I know that I know the song. Somebody maybe knows it. Does anybody know it? I can't hear you, but I hear that you know what the song is. And so the guy struggling to get the untuned piano to sing for us, he was pretty intent. And so he just kept trying stuff, and you'll hear it go out of key for a minute because it's out of key. And then he eventually became comfortable with its dizziness and seemed to start to enjoy every off-key note that it produced so long as its message was legible. So as he started to get familiar with it, he started to play the song that maybe he really wanted to play. I don't know what this song is either, and actually I never found out what this song is, so if somebody knows and can tell me later, I'd love to hear it. But it was beautiful. It was improv, and it was an unsanitized message, and it spoke truths to me that I needed to hear that morning in the midst of the heaviness from turning the corner and seeing what had happened with a roof missing off of a building that I didn't realize was so important to me. So I struck up a conversation with him right before I started filming, before he started in the other song. I said, "Do you mind if I film from above a little bit while you play?" And he said, "For sure." So his hand plugged the keys with the message, Detroit, hung above them, and I thought, this is music. So this is what these pianos are maybe supposed to do, and what they're supposed to invoke. I thanked him for being an artist that shares, and for a message that I needed to hear, and that while I was surprised at its perfect timing, I was not surprised that it was an artist that composed and delivered this message to me. Its depth was boundless, or it felt like that to me, and it was from him, and it was for everybody, but you see feet walking by in the background, so they kept moving, and I stopped, so the message was actually just for me. And what I realized in the moment, when it goes back down, you'll see that on the piano it says, "From me to you forever," which was kind of interesting. So they walked, and I accepted, and I received it. And so off to the side, he had a friend that was with him, and I started to tell her about what I appreciated about the piano being played by her friend after I stared at it sitting silent on my way through the first time. And she told me he was from Southwest Detroit too, because if I stop and talk to somebody for 10 seconds, I feel like the first word that comes out of my mouth is like, Southwest Detroit. Hey, I love the piano, and so she was like, oh, like he's from Southwest too. And so he stopped playing and started talking to us. He said, "Where in the neighborhood are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from around Vernon and Springwells. I grew up on Carson, but now I live over near Avis and Ellesmere." Can you guys guess what he said after I said that? Okay. "Really? I used to live right there on the corner in an apartment building." And I said, "Oh, was it this building?" Because I had taken the pictures that I just showed you about an hour and a half before this conversation. And he said, "Yeah, man, I lived right there on the 3rd floor, the part without a roof." So, of course he did. And his message was being developed since his time in the neighborhood, and I wasn't ready for it until it came through the piano that day for me. I'd never met him before. I'd never met him in that neighborhood. My daughter, who's sitting right here, is the 4th generation of our family to live in the house that we live in. And we had never been around the corner and met him, but I met him playing a piano downtown, and everything about it and the conversation was magic. I walked away with an appreciation for my city, for my neighborhood, and for fraternity with creatives who make it their business to, on purpose or not, meet our needs with assets that we already have between us. That's what community is. And Whoever said that money buys happiness is occupied with the community's makeup, its hair, and its shoes, and not with its heart. So, thank you.
All right. We begin by acknowledging and uplifting the history of Detroit as stolen Anishinaabe people's land, the largest majority black city in the nation with a long legacy of African diasporic global contributions, which was once the last stop on the Underground Railroad, codename Midnight. This is also the United States city with the largest concentration of Arab Americans, a border city with historic and growing Latinx communities, and a legacy of Asian American communities and movements.
We would also like to uplift one of our recently gained ancestors and comrades, Charity Hicks,
Ashe.
who has often said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Wage love. So we want to honor Charity and these communities as a point of grounding for our work, which is a commitment to racial justice and equity in development, and particularly through community benefits agreements, which we're going to talk about today. So, Linda, can you tell us a little bit about what community benefits agreements are?
Happy to do that. Community benefit agreements are commonly known as CBAs, provide a tool to help ensure that public investments have a true community benefit rather than only benefiting powerful development interests. CBAs engage residents in the decision-making process and use a legally binding contract to leverage public investment for public good that is in line with true community needs.
That's right. And so would you mind sharing a little bit about the very heated campaign last election to fight for community benefits ordinance that you and other Detroiters led last year?
Yes, I'm proud to do that. Yes, Proposal A, known as the People's Proposal, was a multi-year grassroots effort put on the ballot as a result of a grassroots signature petition drive. And Proposal B was the competing ballot proposal put forth by our City Council. And here are the basics. Proposal A applied to development projects at $15 million or more with $300,000 in public investment. Proposal B applied to projects of $75 million or more with $1 million in public investment. Proposal A required developers to enter into a legally binding contract based on negotiated agreement with community representatives from those areas most impacted by the development prior to the developer receiving public investment. However, Prop B did not require developers to negotiate or sign a contract with community representatives from the impacted area. A also required the community identify and set its own priorities based on important needs and negotiate from their own negotiating team. The power was given to city representatives in Prop B to appoint the advisory members, to meet with the developers, and to negotiate with the advisory members and the developer. And the city pretty much dictated what would be included in those negotiations.
That's right.
A was truly a grassroots and volunteer effort led by Detroiters who managed to raise only about $11,000 for that campaign. It is rumored, however, that Proposal B raised nearly $1 million in a fiercely fought campaign to defeat Proposal B, including billboards and mailers saying that Prop A was bad for jobs.
That's right, just like this one you're seeing right here with, co-opting the former Mayor Coleman Young's image, et cetera, and black and brown workers. And so even though we had a really strong grassroots effort that was led by elders and babies like my niece that you see right here and everyone in between, and it was roughly 45% of the voters that still voted for Prop A with that $1 million campaign to defeat us, it was ultimately the reason the city's proposal beat the people's proposal. And so wanted to ask you, Linda, what's been some of your experience since Prop B passed with these neighborhood advisory councils that are appointed by the city and their experience negotiating with developers since Prop B went into effect?
We've been monitoring the process, and unfortunately, I would have to say that it's mostly been a very shallow engagement process where residents have little or no input in creating any real benefit for the community. And in most instances, none of the advisory recommendations on behalf of community have managed to make it into the final report submitted to the council for approval and awarding of benefits. Of course, there are many other large-scale projects that have refused to go through the community benefit process altogether. That would include the Q line, which many of us call the fail rail, and the new hockey arena, for example. Any of these could voluntarily go through the process to be respectful to the community whose tax money they are profiting from.
That's right. And so along these lines, us as artists have been trying to find ways to support this important work that you're up to. And we've been organizing something inspired by the community benefits agreements with developer, but with cultural institutions that we call community cultural benefit agreements. And so,
Could you give us an example of how you got involved in this?
no problem, Linda. All right. So my artist collective is called Complex Movements. And we're really concerned about the ways that artists and arts and culture are often co-opted and leveraged by city government, corporations, foundations, and developers to validate harmful work they are doing, on the other hand, in the city. And so one example of how we try to navigate some of these contradictions is that New York's new museum has this event called Idea City. And they approached several Detroiters a couple years ago, including Complex Movements and myself, Halima Cassels, Jenny Lee, Dreamhampton, and many more to participate in that event. And so we really wanted to get involved. We heard a lot of great things about it, but we had several concerns about how to make sure it was accountable to our community. And so first and foremost, we were really concerned about the venue for the event, which was the health department building, former health department building called Herman Kiefer, which you worked at for years, right? How long did you work at the Herman Kiefer building?
I worked at Herman Kiefer for 10 years, and one of my important pieces of work there is helping to develop the first community-based harm reduction kit with a group of local Detroiters organizing and fighting HIV/AIDS.
That's right, and CBA is a form of harm reduction too, so it's building on that legacy, and that's amazing work, and I know your background plays a big role in why you care about this racial justice work in the city. So we reached out to you, you connected us with a neighborhood organizing group, and they were fighting to have a CBA process with the Herman Kiefer developer so they could have a say in how their community was being changed and developed. And so we reached out to Idea City through the new museum, and they agreed to go through a community benefits agreement process with us for the event, and we created this MOU, and it was not just to prioritize the event spending and prioritizing Black and people of color-owned Detroit-based businesses, but also in hopes that as cultural workers, we could leverage our relationships and our visibility to uplift the work of those neighborhood residents fighting for equity in that development at Herman Kiefer. And so that was a huge precedent that then Idea City went on to apply that model in Greece, in France, in New York with their whole series of Idea City events. And then a few months after that, Roberta Uno, who is a legendary artist and was a grant maker for years that many of you know, her and her team at Art Change Us approached us to bring their Remap event here to Detroit. And we told them about this model, and they were really excited to integrate that into their work. And so we wove that into the process, and including the CBA principles and uplifting the Prop A CBA ordinance. And so after that, it went so well that we actually created a cultural community benefits principles toolkit, which is up on their website. And Roberta Uno has actually written a piece in the GIA Reader, which y'all should check out, about this process as well from her perspective. And so since that, a crew of us Detroit artists have joined in the CBA coalition that you started and helped coordinate, and we're trying to integrate arts and culture more into that strategy and process, and we really look forward to building that collaboration. So we're all out of time, but we want to leave y'all with a seed. So what seed would you give everybody to take home with them to their communities?
Here's my takeaway, I love that you took an existing tool, an idea, and in typical Detroit fashion, you collectivize it into something powerful and transformative. That's an incredible strategy to lift up. And I would encourage those of you in the audience to look at ways that you can take the CBA back to your community, your workplace, and look at it in terms of your grant making as well. I also would ask that you lift up these important principles in terms of that work, and those principles include collective vision, democratic participation, transparency, and accountability.
Great, thank you so much, y'all.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, Grantmakers. Welcome to Detroit. As Ill mentioned, home of the highest concentration of Arab Americans in North America, something we're quite proud of here in the region. And I'm going to spend some time building a little bit on my colleagues up here. And I think kind of the overarching theme here is how arts and community come together for the benefit for those that we're serving and representing. Now, you might be wondering, first and foremost, something that we get asked quite a lot. Why are there so many Arabs in Detroit? And it's really not that impressive of a story. We came here in the early 20th century, like so many others, looking for opportunity, predominantly economic opportunity, in the growing metropolis that we now know as Detroit. So in many ways, Arab Americans have played a critical role in helping to build the city in this region. However, like so many other communities, we've been faced with challenges with immigration laws over the course of history. And in the 1920s, because most of us come from West Asia and North Africa, our immigration patterns essentially just stopped. So during that time, Ford moved over to Dearborn, built the Rouge complex, and some of our community evolved over into that part of the city, or I should say that suburb. Fast forward into the mid-1960s, you have the Hart-Celler Act, and once again, we're starting to see waves of Arab immigrants coming to the US. However, at this time, it's a much different story. Folks are coming predominantly due to war and conflict. And of course, Dearborn, have already established an Arab American community, became a destination. And with this rise of the Arab American community, a nonprofit was born called Access. And Access was really a bunch of volunteer community activists who decided we need to think comprehensively about community wellness, everything from basics, human services, to getting our community involved in civil society. But what really strikes and impresses me is this idea that culture and art is a vital component of wellness. And with that, we started a cultural arts department in the mid-1980s. And it really sought to do two things: empower our community to tell its story and to celebrate our history and our traditions, but to also educate the larger public on our presence in the United States. And that demand became more and more and more. And in the late 1990s, there was a discussion about maybe we need a museum, an actual institution. Well, as you know, in the early portion of this century, we were faced by a pretty complex moment in history, 9/11. And with that came a whole new demand and set of pressures for our community. And this idea of building a museum became that much more critical. And our founders essentially set out across the country engaging Arab Americans in 10 major urban areas and asking, what would you want to see in a museum? And those of you who had the opportunity to visit our institution the other day got a sense of that. So from our foundation, we have essentially been engaging with our community to tell our narrative. And that's so critical because there's 35,000 cultural museums in this nation, and we are the singular one telling the Arab American story. And you can imagine what that is like in these highly politicized times that we're living in right now. So in addition to empowering our community and telling our story, we have a vital component that still seeks to inform the public on who we are. We're a conduit for Arab Americans. We don't pretend to be the experts on Arab Americans. We simply facilitate with our community cultural opportunities and defining our own history. And more importantly, we leverage what we have for the benefit of our community. So some of you had the opportunity to see our annex the other day, which was about 5,000 square feet adjacent to the museum. And this was built entirely to allow a space for the community to come together, to incubate art, to have a third space for dialogue, for community activism. We're living in a time with shrinking public space, and we need to find ways in which as institutions we can provide those spaces. We can leverage our assets for the betterment of our community. So to speak to that, I want to talk a little bit about our community-based approach and share a few stories with that. And the first one is something I've alluded to already, that community empowerment and ownership through participation and co-creation nurtures a community. We think broadly about that, especially when we're building our exhibitions at the Arab American National Museum. We don't do this in isolation of the community. We actually go to scholars in the community, community experts, artists, and we convene them and get their insights. It has to be organic and done in dialogue with these folks. We cannot speak for a community that comes from 22 different countries, has been coming here for over 150 years, and is religiously diverse. We are not a monolithic group, as no community is in this nation. We have to work to foster a safe environment for sharing experiences and expressing ideas. You know, I was at a convening the Wallace Foundation put on way back in 2006, and the CEO of a very prominent Chicago-based cultural institution came up to me and said, "Are you guys political?" And I said, you know, we're not striving to be political, but kind of innately we've become political just on who we are and trying to be a voice. That matters when you're creating space for people to come together in dialogue or to have a place where they can just reflect on what's happening in society. And I'll give you an example. After Orlando last year, we were really perplexed at how we find space for the LGBTQ Muslim community in Dearborn to have a place where they can just go and connect and form a sense of community. So we opened the annex and just allowed folks in to use that space. And that's just a simple way of illustrating that. It's important to be timely and responsive, and this year has been no shortage of opportunity for that. You know, we've done collaborative film screenings in opposition to the travel ban. We have been building collaborations and nurturing collaborations with other communities, such as the Japanese American National Museum and that community, looking at the internment through executive orders of the Japanese American, and also looking at the implications for Muslim American and Arab Americans through the current political administration. These opportunities are immense, but we find that through arts and culture, we're able to give our community a place to express themselves and to have that outlet. We're constantly seeking to present art and culture in innovative new ways. And one of the wonderful things about our museum, although we are national and we do work around the country, Dearborn and Southeast Michigan will always be our home. And being a cultural institution rooted within your community is really wonderful because you can begin to explore how we can basically break the barriers of the physicality of the museum and start to embed people into the community, meeting with artists in their workshops, exploring cultural traditions through food in the community, doing pop-up dinners during Ramadan that educate the community on especially the non-Arab community, on what is Islam. So really working to embed folks in that, and that speaks to the last point about developing immersive opportunities for people to engage with art and culture. One of the most recent things that we're doing now is we've launched a residency program across the street in an art space property that we have in Dearborn. And this is really wonderful because for the first time we're able to bring Arab American artists and other allies to our community and to embed them with the community to co-create stories. So I'll kind of give a quick example of one we have on the horizon. I think most of you know Ping Chong and the Undesirable Element series they've been doing. We're actually going to be working with them in the new year to look at the racist history of Dearborn. We used to have the bull counter of the North as the mayor, Orville Hubbard, and to basically attack that racist history and this notion of Dearborn being governed by Sharia law in this Islamophobic era, and to reclaim that narrative with the community. So as you can see, this isn't about an artist coming and being holed up in isolation. It's about working with the community to build narratives, to empower community, and to reclaim our story. And I think there's a great sense of justice and empowerment that could happen through that. So I would encourage all of you to think critically also about your work and how that enables institutions like ours and within your own as we move forward. So thank you all for supporting the arts.
Thank you. Devon, Erik, Linda, Il, thank you so much. This was just a great start to the day, and I hope everyone's feeling really energized. So let's hear it again for our Idea Lab speakers. Not just today, yesterday's as well. We've had a heck of a group. Thank you.